Okay, good evening, everyone. Hello and welcome. So glad you're able to join us. Yeah. My name's Steve Wolpert. I'm a member of the faculty here at St. Mary's in the politics department, and I have the wonderful job of introducing our guest speaker tonight. First, I want to acknowledge all of the folks who helped make this possible. This event is one of a series of what are called community conversations sponsored by a coalition consisting of people from the Mount Diablo League of Women Voters, the West County League of Women Voters, Contra Costa Library, and Contra Costa TV. I want to especially acknowledge Mary Schreiber, president of the, thank you. Also, Sean Gilbert, who is also with the League, is donating pocket copies of the Constitution. They're being handed out now. Get your copies while they last. And Diane Bianchi, who's been a stalwart member of this team. Also, Albert Garcia, who's not here, but he's minding the Zoom feed and the recording. This will be rebroadcast and it will be up on YouTube pages after, well, I'm not sure just when. Go to the community conversations page of the League of Women Voters and you'll find information about how to watch it again. On campus, I want to thank the Fred and Patricia Disney Forum for their support, financial and administrative, and the Educating for Citizenship grant, who also provided support for this event. So it takes a lot of people to make one of these things happen. And we're very pleased to have so much support. The way it'll work, Professor Amar will make opening remarks, after which there will be opportunity for questions from the audience. It looks like there's going to be a microphone over there. Microphone there. So the tradition here at St. Mary's is that students get to ask the first two questions. After that, you're all welcome to come up and ask a question and have a conversation with Professor Amar. When that's done, he will be out in the lobby signing copies of his book, which are for sale there. So please help yourself get a copy and get it signed there. And while that is happening, we are going to raffle off a few copies of his book to students, St. Mary's students who are here. If you have a playing card, then you want to hold that. That's going to be the basis that we decide how to distribute these books. And we'll do that quickly so that you can get your copy autographed by Professor Amar tonight. I want to introduce you to him. I want to say some things about Professor Amar. He's a first-generation American, grew up in Walnut Creek, just down the road a piece, went off to Yale, got his bachelor's degree and his law degree there, and he's been a member of the faculty there for 40 years. He's now the Sterling Professor of Constitutional Law and Political Science. I'm not an expert in this field, but I'm going to say that I think that with the publication of this book, Professor Amar is now the foremost living authority on constitutional history. And of course, I need to explain why. So to quote Thomas Jefferson, let these facts be submitted to a candid world. First, let's just think about the volume of his scholarship. This is his 9th book. Some of them are concise, and some of them are copious. He's also published over 100 articles in law reviews, plus assorted book chapters. So the first thing we can say is he's a prolific scholar. Second, how about quality? Well, the best measure of that is his reputation among other members of his scholarly community. And he is held in high esteem by other constitutional scholars. That doesn't mean they all agree with everything he says, but that's the way scholarship works. But his reputation is, he's leading the conversation in many areas. He's contributing not only new information, but new analysis and new insights into our understanding of the history of the Constitution. So he is in the forefront, I'd say. So this book has only been out less than a month. The critics have called it eloquently written, a masterpiece. It also, before it was released, it got a Kirkus Star review. Now, for those of you who have no idea what I just said, if this book were a restaurant, it would already have a Michelin star. And as food for thought, it is marvelous. So, third, let's talk about impact. His research has been cited by Supreme Court justices from all across the ideological spectrum in more than 50 cases. That's more than any other living scholar. Members of both parties have called him to testify before Congress. So this is scholarship with consequences. And finally, and to me, it may be the most important, he excels at disseminating his scholarship to the general public. He writes for the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the LA Times, Atlantic. He has a podcast. It's in its 5th year now, an educational podcast. I think I've listened to close to 250 episodes. I have learned so much. I thought I knew a lot, but I didn't compared to what I've learned since. So in sum, he has a record of surpassing excellence, not only in the ivory tower, but also in the halls of power and in the public square. The last thing I want to say about this book, it's timely, not just because it's about birthright citizenship and voting rights, but because the bonds by which Americans of different races, religions, and cultures have forged themselves into a single nation have been weakening. There's now controversy over what it means to be an American. So we are very fortunate to have Akhil Amar to remind us with passion and with eloquence that what we all have in common is the Constitution. Please give a warm St. Mary's welcome to Professor Akhil Amar.
I asked my friend Steve if I could borrow the book because I didn't bring one with me, and just in case I get asked questions. It's so meaningful, actually a little bit emotional for me to be back home, that you've invited me here. This is home. I was born in Ann Arbor, Michigan, so I am first generation American, but we moved to Walnut Creek when I was 2 years old. And I went to Los Lomas High School, and just by coincidence, I'm sitting at dinner with a St. Mary's student, and we're just chatting. And I said, tell me about yourself. He said, I went to a high school called Los Lomas, and I just was quiet. I said, and where did you go to intermediate school? And he says, I went to a place called Walnut Creek Intermediate, and I was quiet, and I said, well, where do you live? And he actually mentioned a certain neighborhood, which is where I used to have a girlfriend way back in the day, and I was quiet initially. So it's so wonderful to be here. I passed by Miramonte, and the guy who actually interviewed me for college, I was lucky enough to go to Yale College. I've been there for half a century, basically. Was a Miramonte High School guidance counselor. And this is home because even though my folks aren't here anymore, I was able to see my dad yesterday in Los Angeles, and I'm staying with my brother and my sister-in-law, Karen, and she's here. And yes, it was like being back in my own bed. And so this is home. And so Karen, thank you, for making me feel at home. Thank you all for showing up. I'm seeing people from earlier in my life, and thank you for coming. So Yes, I'd like to talk with you, and we're going to move into conversation mode pretty soon about what we have in common as Americans. And my friend Steve put it very well, and I don't think I had met him in person until today. Um, but thank you, Steve. You listened to this podcast, and when in the conversation, you're going to ask questions, and I'm going to often say, gee, here's the 2-minute answer, but for the 20-minute answer, you'll want to listen to the podcast, and it's free. So if you forget the name, just Google Akhil Amar podcast. It has a cute name, Amarica's Constitution, not America's Constitution. It's weekly. To repeat, it's free. For those of you who are lawyers in the audience, you can get CLE credit for listening to it. It's about an hour and a half every week. We go into great depth on all sorts of constitutional issues. Sometimes we have guests, left and right. Stephen Breyer has come on, and the founder of the Federalist Society. He's come on multiple times. I clerked for him. The founder and national chair of the Federalist Society, with whom I teach once a week. It also comes on regularly. His name is Steve Calabrese. You'll hear from journalists like Bob Woodward and Linda Greenhouse, and political figures. My student Rob Bonta has agreed to come. He hasn't yet scheduled it, but we have members of Congress on. We have former presidential aspirants on. Gary Hart came several times. So left and right. And sometimes I say we, just the two of us, Akhil and there's my friend Erez Kalir, who's just walked in, and he is also part of Erez. I was just telling them how this is a special homecoming for me, and one of the reasons it's a homecoming is seeing, dear friends like my friend Erez, and so I say we because the podcast is yours truly and a guy who's not law trained at all. He represents basically the general citizenry. His name is Andy Lipka. He's a retired ophthalmologist, and he's maybe the smartest guy I know. And he just asks me questions often and pushes me very hard on all sorts of issues, and we talk, and you're most welcome to listen in, and I hope if you like it, you'll even tell others about it. There are 5 years worth of episodes. They're archived. They're word searchable with various apps. Every week we have written materials. Maybe it's a Supreme Court case. Maybe it's a presidential statement. Maybe it's a law review article. Maybe it's an op-ed in the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or some other thing. We have, as I say, liberals and conservatives. Sometimes we have them on simultaneously. We don't do food fights. So people actually disagree with each other from time to time. And I hope if you listen to it, it'll make you smarter. So in the back and forth that we're going to have after I tell you a little bit about the book project, I'm going to sometimes say, listen, here's my short answer. For the longer one, you have to listen to the podcast. For the even more complete version, you're going to have to read a book chapter, or maybe a book, or maybe a series of books. And here's why I'm making the pitch for books. And I was telling some of the St. Mary's students this at our dinner, because in 160 characters, it's hard to make an argument. You can insult someone in 160 characters, but you can't explain your reasons. And I think this generation reads fewer books than previous generations, and this worries me a lot. This book has 4 main heroes. I'll tell you about them, but 2 of them were born into nothing. but they read books and they read books and they read books and they changed the world. And since I'm back in Contra Costa County, I got to tell you, I'm a public school kid, and almost no one from my high school had ever gone to an Ivy League school, much less Yale. And the place where really I was educated was not just in public schools, in classrooms and in playgrounds, and but in the Contra Costa Public Library in Walnut Creek, California. And every day in the summer, I get on my bike, ride down to the library, pick up a book, take it home, read it that day, bring it back the next day, and pick up another book. And the taxpayers of Contra Costa County paid for my education. I'm very grateful to you all. And books are deeply meaningful to me. That's why I try to write them, because they made me who I am. They made at least two, truthfully, all four of the main characters in this book. I don't want to spill the beans too quickly about who my main characters are. But when I say main characters, now I'm going to start talking about this book. It's part of a series of books, and I need your help. See, it'd be nice if you bought the book. It'd be very nice, and my publisher would be very happy. But I don't care as much whether you buy the book. There are libraries. Oh, I want something so much more from you than that. I'm so much more greedy. It's kind of and there are very few miserable days in California, but it's kind of cold and wet. And you came here, and you're giving me an hour or two of your very precious time, but I'm very greedy. I want so much more than that. I want you to read the book, not buy it. And it's going to take a long time for you to read the book. But I'm hoping that if you read it, if I'm really lucky, it'll change your life. It'll change how you think about America, our history, your identity, what you have in common with the people here and the people across this vast continent. That's what the books are about. They're not about me at all. But they're about us. And we have very little in common, we Americans, bluntly. We don't have race. There are other countries in the world that have strong racial identities, that have strong religious identities, where everyone has basically the same first language, or is told the same cultural stories that unify them as a people. But we don't have Shakespeare the way the Brits do, or Goethe the way the Germans do. We don't have Norse sagas or the Iliad and the Odyssey as Scandinavian societies or the Greeks might have. So to repeat, we don't have race or national origin or even first language, and you especially understand this in California, or politics. We're deeply divided and polarized. Geographically, we're vast. It's a whole continent. Our counterpart, don't tell a French person this because they'll take offense, but they think that they're our counterparts. No, they're not. Okay, the counterpart of France is California, and California is actually, frankly, more advanced than France in economics and great universities and military power. And I think we hold our own even in wine, but I'm not an expert on that. Okay, so the counterpart of the United States is all of Europe. Think just about all the vastness of Europe, the linguistic, religious diversity, to use a phrase. So we don't have very much in common, truthfully, we Americans. There are mountain people and valley people and beach people, and they are very different kinds of people often. I was visiting my friend Erez earlier today, and just even within Berkeley, they're the people who live in the Berkeley Hills, and they're the people who live in the flats, and they're not always the same kind of people. So cities and hinterlands. So what do we have in common as Americans? Because we have to govern ourselves, and we have to have enough in common that we can talk to each other. As I see it, we have the Constitution, I would say the Declaration of Independence, the story underlying those documents, and the Constitution, of course, includes the amendments. Without the amendments, it may be hard to have a love for this, at least the kind of love that I have for the project, without the amendments. So here's our national narrative, and we need to understand it, and we don't today. okay? Left or right, most of us. So we need to understand, in order to understand each other and to be mutually intelligible, the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence and the story that unites them, the story of America, the story of us. So I'm trying to write a series of books. My friend Steve has got me just right to introduce Americans in high school, place like Los Lomas, in college, place like St. Mary's, in law school, and in the corridors of power, in Congress, in the judiciary, in the executive branch. 4 of my students are senators of the United States. 4, and they're only 100, you know. And I've had students who have served in every presidential administration of both parties, and even the best of the best of the best. Many of them don't know that much about our constitutional story, and it's the only thing they have in common. So this is a real problem. And so I'm trying to write these big books. Here's the promise. And then I'll tell you a little bit about them, and then we'll have a conversation. Because I'm asking so much of you. I know I am. Your time. I want you to read them. I want you to have book clubs, talk about them. If you email the podcast and say we have a book club, we will Zoom in December or January to your book club and chat with you, Andy Lipka and I, about the book. We want to hear what you have to think and defend. You know, if you have questions, the book, you won't have too many questions yet because you haven't engaged the thing. But if you read these books, because I'm the same kid I was in 6th grade in Walnut Creek. I get up and I get on my bike and I go to the library and I check out a book and I read it and then I return it and then I check out another book. So that's what I've been doing, except now almost all the books that I check out and read are about constitutional law. And I'm learning stuff that contradicts what I was taught sometimes. My promise is if you read these books, you will know more than I knew before I wrote the books. And you will know, honestly, about half, maybe more, of what I actually know about constitutional law. And I spent 50 years just studying constitutional law. And you need to know some of this stuff because every 4 years, you pick a president. And the first thing that she or he has to do is to swear an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And how can you actually know whether that person is faithful to that oath or not? Yes, Steve, the word faithful. I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States and will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. How can you know this is a place that's all about faithfulness? St. Mary's. How can you know whether someone is discharging that responsibility faithfully or not if you don't know actually what the Constitution actually really does say? You have responsibilities as well as rights, and you can't discharge them without knowing the story of your Constitution, and most of us don't. I didn't before I wrote the books, and I was a pretty broad reader, even at an early age. I'm not going to embarrass you, but even in an audience like this, I'm guessing fewer than 8 of you in this audience could stand up right now, close your eyes, and name your presidents in order. You're laughing, but I promise you, I could do that at 8 years old, and this is true. And I have friends from Walnut Creek who are probably here in the audience who could confirm that. So yeah, is that Mark Sturgis? Oh my gosh! So yes, when I played Philip Nolan in 8th grade in Mrs. Callender's class, and you live on the corner of Sierra Drive and Walker, and I remember, Mark, your science fair exhibit with, you had embryos that you broke open at every 3 days or something to show this transition from yolk to to chicken. So you can confirm that I was that dweeb. Okay. I remember that. Yes. Yes, I was in kindergarten or 1st grade. They let me read to the 5th graders. Yes. That was so cool. Okay. So I am back home. Okay. And I'm grateful that some of you have have shown up. Um, and my challenge to you is we need to know more about us than we now know, because it will give you a sense of connection to other people, even if they disagree politically. I'm left of center, but I do believe that my friends who are right of center, many of them actually think that a lot of Americans have no understanding of American greatness, who are left of center. And they may not be wrong about that. I think a lot of Americans who are left of center don't understand what has been great about America. And conservatives may intuit that there's American greatness, but they don't even know why. And they're at risk, actually, of threatening part of American greatness, like birthright citizenship or birthright equality, because they don't know, actually, what's great about America. And when you read the books, I'll show you all the defects, the warts, the imperfections, or at least I'll try to. But then I'll also show you how, for all its imperfections, this is a pretty amazing project that's gotten better over time, net. That's what I actually believe, and I'll give you data for that. Okay, so this is the middle volume, Born Equal, of a 3-volume trilogy. And I haven't written volume 3 yet. And it tries to take you, the reader, through a quarter of a millennium of American constitutional experience. It starts in 1760, not, by the way, 1763, which is how most books start about the American Revolution. I start 3 years earlier for reasons that we could get into. You could ask questions about that. So volume 1, which is already written, and it's even longer than this one. Okay, Mark has it, okay. It's called The Words That Made Us. And the subtitle is America's Constitutional Conversation, 1760 to 1840. It's the first 80 years, the first 80 years of the project. And the words that made us, the title is a pun. It's the words that made the U.S. Or put differently, how we, the people, came to be an us, a we, a collectivity. Because in 1760, we're not. We're a series of colonies on the mainland of North America that happened to be under the British Crown and happened to be contiguous, but don't really have any other real sense of collective identity. There are New Yorkers. There are South Carolinians. There are Virginians. There are Pennsylvanians. They don't even talk to each other, much less have any juridical unity, that legal unity, a strong political culture that's continental. They all talk to the crown, but they don't talk to each other. And you can see this by looking at newspapers and seeing, in effect, who retweets whom, because they're republishing pieces from elsewhere in the world. But the New Yorkers aren't republishing what's happening in Virginia. They're both republishing what happened in London. Okay, 1760. There's no we. Volume 1, the words that made us, because we became an us by talking to each other. And 1760, we're not, but over the course of 8 fateful decades, Americans first are pushed together by British negligence and disregard, benign neglect, and then by British oppression in various ways, and they begin to develop a continental consciousness. They begin to share newspaper pieces with each other, to meet face to face in continental conclaves, like the Stamp Act Congress of 1765, the First Continental Congress of 1774, the Second Continental Congress of 1775. They will, in the end, declare independence, come up with reasons for that declaration, which we call the Declaration of Independence, as opposed to just the mere declaring of independence. They will generate state constitutions, one after another, that build on each other. They will create the first glimmerings of an intercontinental structure, a NATO EU-like structure called the Articles of Confederation. They will eventually abandon that project because it's not strong enough, and they will create an indivisible constitution. And oh, them's fighting words, that word indivisible, because we're going to fight a civil war over that. But I'm with Mr. Lincoln in believing that the Constitution created an indivisible union. They'll add a Bill of Rights. They'll solidify the system. They will, and then the system will, I take you through resistance, revolution, constitution, and then consolidation. The system actually kind of solidifies. One generation passes from the scene, and another generation begins to take over relatively successfully. The first 80 years, the words that made us. And I bring the curtain down in 1840 because that's when the founding generation dies off, the last of the founders. Volume 2, which I've just completed, is the next 80 years. And I say 80 for a reason. You've heard that phrase before, and not just because you studied French. 80 is 80 in French. This is 1840 to 1920. And the big theme of this period is the theme of birth equality. We're all born equal. That's not quite the theme of the first period. Yes, the Declaration says that all men are created equal, but every single colony at the time those words were written was a slave colony. Slavery existed even in New Hampshire, in Massachusetts, in Connecticut, and New York. All 13 were slave jurisdictions. Some had a lot of slaves, some had a lower percentage of slaves, but 13 slave colonies saying all men are created equal. That's July 1776. Over the next period, and as late as 1840, America is part slave and part free. There are millions of Americans who are groaning in chains in 1840. The North has begun an abolitionist project, and I'm going to say a little bit more about that, but the Deep South hasn't. And so America is actually deeply divided about slavery. That's where the book begins. It will take you through the next 8 fateful decades. The first 8, the big theme is we become a we. Even though we don't quite have that much in common still, especially on slavery. We have an increasingly anti-slavery North and a pro-slavery South. Truthfully, it's a bad marriage, and it's not going to end particularly well in 1860 because actually there wasn't sufficiently strong unity of purpose. And then you say, well, then why did they get married? And I'll tell you very briefly. But this period, the next 80 years, 1840 to 1920, the big theme is birth equality. We're born equal, and it's a story of a civil war and a series of constitutional amendments that codify an increasingly broad and deep understanding of created equal, born equal. A 13th Amendment that says everyone is born equally free, no slavery, anywhere. 14th Amendment says everyone in America, born under the American flag, is not just born free, but born an equal, not just born equally free, but born an equal citizen with civil rights, speech, press, religion, guns, fair trial. So we're born equally free, the 13th Amendment. Americans under the flag are born equally citizens. That's the 14th Amendment. 15th Amendment says whether you're born black or white, you're going to be eligible to be an equal voter. And then a 19th Amendment by 1920, generations later, says whether you're born male or female, you're equally a political participant, a suffrage amendment. The big idea of the constitutional transformation, the subtitle is Born Equal, the subtitle is Remaking America's Constitution, 1840 to 1920. The big idea is an increasingly deep and broad thought that we're born equal, we're created equal, and people should not be exalted or demeaned because of the accidents of their birth, because they were born white or black, male or female, Jew or Gentile, in wedlock or out of wedlock, firstborn in the family or lastborn child in the family, whether they were born to citizen parents or to non-citizen parents, as I was born to non-citizen parents. My parents happened to be here legally, but even if they hadn't been here legally, I would have still been born equal, whether you're born to parents here legally or illegally. Wow, it's a radical set of ideas, this born equal thought. And it expands and it reverberates and it deepens, and we're still debating what that means for, did I say whether you're born equal, gay, or straight? I can't remember if I did, but I just did now. Okay, so and who helps cement that idea in Supreme Court jurisprudence? A justice from Northern California named Anthony Kennedy, by the way. So that's the theme of this vibe. I'm going to say just a couple of words more, and then let's have a conversation. One, well, Akhil, you say that they created an indivisible union, and you also say that they didn't really have enough in common, and that's why we're going to have a civil war. And if it's an indivisible union, you say Lincoln is right. I say, yep, I think that's true. Why did they form an indivisible union then if they didn't have enough in common? I'll say it even slightly differently. By the way, this is the same actually question. So why did they think they needed to create a perfect union? And a different way of asking that is, what made Americans, white Americans especially, free for most of our history? Because it's not what you were taught in school. You were taught, oh, it's because we have separation of powers. Well, the Brits don't have separation of powers, and they're tolerably free. Oh, it's because we have a written constitution. Oh, well, the Brits don't have a written constitution. Oh, it's because Americans love liberty. Well, I promise you, my parents loved liberty too. But when they're born in the 1920s and 1930s, India is not free at all. They're not self-governing. They're under, a British thumb. Okay, so what is it? This is one of the deepest questions of all. You guys are really smart. You came out. You're really motivated. And unless you've read my books, I don't think you'll know the answer, because I didn't know the answer before I wrote the books. What has made white Americans especially free for most of our history? What's the secret to our sauce? And if you've read the books, hold off, because you know at least what my answer will be. But if you haven't, what do you say? Yeah, that's exactly what I was taught in 8th grade. But first of all, what does the rule of law mean? And did the French not have the rule of law? So, the American dream, I promise you, there are people who dream all around the world, and dreams aren't sufficient. Okay, I'll do it a different way. Ask a Ukrainian today, what's the difference between America and Ukraine? Because it's not that we dream of freedom and they don't. Not at all. Yes, it's our geostrategic isolation. It's our borders. I voted against Trump 3 times, but you need to understand borders, okay? I'll do it a different way. It's the fact that for the first 150 years, we had no standing army in peacetime because we didn't need one in general, because for most of that period, we knew we could whoop the Mexicans and we could whoop the Canadians. Okay, and we still can. My money's on California just one-on-one against Canada. Easy, easy. We have far more military industrial complex in California. You're laughing, but you can't understand the debates today about Canada as a 51st state or Panama or Greenland or whatever without actually understanding. Here's what made Americans free, that we had these vast oceans that kept us from the thuggish powers of the world, and we didn't need a big army because actually we didn't have Putin on our border, and the Ukrainians do. That's, okay, volume 1 of the, that's the words that made us. Why am I telling you this? Because you now have, and have since World War II, the world's largest military industrial complex, the largest that's ever been seen in the world, and it should scare the heck out of you. And that's the deep background of troops in Los Angeles or in Portland. And we could debate, whether that's appropriate or not. And troops did actually go into the Southland after the Civil War, but that's actually the deep structure. Americans didn't have any large standing army in peacetime for the first 150 years. And that's what made Americans free in the main, because large standing armies, even your own large standing army, can be actually filled with thugs who are trained to shoot to kill civilians, okay? And when you have in Boston in 1770, 1 out of every 2 or 3 adult men in Boston wearing a red coat, that's actually true. You're going to have the Boston Massacre, okay? And that's the words that made us. And so what has saved America for much of its history won't work anymore. And so you need to understand, we're going to need to think about other guardrails and safeguards. Okay. Now, once you understand that, I can tell you why they had to have a bad marriage. Okay. Who coined the world? What is the world's first? Who crafted the world's first political cartoon? Ben Franklin. Bifocals, the Franklin stove, so many inventions that he, the lightning rod. But one of his inventions is the political cartoon. He's writing for a democratic society. 3 words. It's the world's first viral meme, and it goes around the world again and again. And I tell that story in The Words That Made Us. Join or die. 3 words. And you either understand that or you're not. Hashtag join or die. And it's retweeted everywhere. It's repeat. I show you, a certain newspaper culture. And the point is, if you don't unite, you're going to have a land border on the continent. And if you have a land border on the continent, any one of these regimes can make an alliance with George III or Louis or Catherine the Great, or Frederick, the Great, or Putin or whatever, these European thugs. And then actually you will have military European thugs on your flanks. Today, see, Abraham Lincoln is right, because if South Carolina is allowed to secede today, then they can make a treaty with Putin tomorrow. And the day after tomorrow, you will have Russians in the Carolinas, which is not where you want them. Ask any Ukrainian. Okay, and that's not what you were taught. The rule of law, separation of powers, written constitutions. No, it's actually, it is about geography and therefore borders, and we need to think about that stuff. Okay, so the North and the South didn't have a lot in common, but they had to unite, they had to join or die, and it was a bad marriage because the North thought it could change the South. Don't get married to someone thinking you can change them. Just life advice. Okay. And it didn't work out so well because here's the second thing I'm going to tell you, and then maybe I'll just ask you one final question and you can ask me. So, how many of you have heard of 1619? And that's the year that slave ships from the old world arrive in the new world, and I think that's not really interesting. The entire world has slavery. Asians have slavery among Asians. Africans have slavery among Africans. Then the new world peoples, the tribes, the Aztecs and others practiced slavery among themselves. That's not news. That's olds. The ancient world had an idea of freeing individual slaves. It's in the Old Testament. It's in the New Testament. Ben-Hur, Charlton Heston gets his freedom. Funny thing happened on the way to the Forum. Zero Mostel gets his freedom. Drama, comedy. Ancient world has an idea of freeing slaves. Here's what the ancient world does not have: the idea of ending slavery, the idea of abolition. When does abolition, the idea of abolition, enter the consciousness of the world. When's the first abolition society formed in the world? And you don't know this because you're reading Howard Zinn's shit. That's the only national narrative we have, and it's false. It's very leftist, and it's telling you stuff that isn't quite true and not telling you stuff that is true. The first abolition society in the world is formed in Philadelphia in 1775. And its presidents are going to be Ben Franklin and Benjamin Rush, who signed the Declaration of Independence. And immediately after the Declaration of Independence, the North starts ending slavery. I'm going to play a word association game with you. This is like, you go to the therapist and he says something or she something, and you say the first thing that pops in your head. Which person pops into your head when I say the Declaration of Independence? Of course. And therefore Virginia. But right next to Jefferson, there's John Adams from Massachusetts. And there's Ben Franklin from Pennsylvania. And here's why that's important. This is the introduction to Born Equal. Because immediately after the Declaration of Independence, Ben Franklin is going to preside over a Pennsylvania Constitutional Convention in Independence Hall, what we call Independence Hall, the Pennsylvania State House, that adds the following sentence to its new state constitution: all men are born equally free and independent. And that's going to lead to the abolition of slavery in Pennsylvania. Oh, and John Adams in Massachusetts is going to preside over the Massachusetts Constitutional Convention of 1780, and it says all men are born free and equal. And that's going to lead immediately, not even gradually, to the abolition of slavery in Massachusetts. And in my lifetime, Margie Marshall in 2005 is going to use those very same words to actually affirm a right of same-sex marriage in the Goodrich case. All men are free and equal, gay or straight, black or white, they're born free. Okay, so immediately upon the Declaration of Independence, there's an abolitionist project that begins in the North, and Lincoln will be actually building on that. And the Deep South isn't on board with that, South Carolina, and that's going to lead to a civil war. Okay, so I told you already something interesting. Americans invent abolition, not the Brits, not anyone else. We did it, and you don't know that, and that's American greatness, you see. But American greatness is actually a liberal reform, not a reactionary project of excluding people. I'll say one or two more things. So it's right in front of your eyes, but you don't know what it means. We, the people, do ordain and establish this Constitution. You know what that means? They put the damn thing to a vote up and down a continent. No one had ever done that before in the history of the world. There were very few self-governing societies in all the world. The ones that did exist tended to flicker out after a bit. They existed over a tiny, span of geographic span. Ancient Athens under the Periclean, under the Cleisthenic Constitution, Periclean Athens, 30,000 people, something like that. And it flickers out. They had a self-government. Some other places did, a few, but never over a continent. And none of these democracies had ever actually had written constitutions voted on by the people themselves. None. So here's the history of the world until 1787. It's the history of kings, emperors, czars, sultans, Mughal lords, tribal chieftains, thugs all. And then we, the people, and the Declaration of Independence wasn't put to a popular vote. Neither were any of the state constitutions in 1776. Oh, but in 1787, we, the people, and they're not my forebears. I'm not telling my story or my people's stories, my ethnic. I'm telling the story of us. We in 1778 put the thing to a vote up and down a whole freaking continent. Oh, and the voting rules for that. It's right in front of your eyes, and they don't even tell you what it means in the textbooks, which is why I was at dinner, I was telling someone, stop teaching the dumb textbooks, teach the smart textbooks, okay, which I wrote. And this is actually a book called America's Constitutional Biography, and it's chapter 1, and I say, so who was the we? What you mean we, paleface? Here are the voting rules in New York. All adult free male citizens got to vote on this proposed constitution. No race tests, no religious tests, no property qualifications, no literacy qualifications. Those aren't the ordinary rules in New York. Wow, that's radical stuff. And you don't know the radicalism of the preamble. In 8 of the 13 states, property qualifications were abolished or lowered compared to what they ordinarily were. Now, it still sucks from the point of view today because women don't vote and there is slavery in some places and there are property qualifications in some places, but compared to 1786 or 1686 or 1586 or all the 86s back to the dawn of time, this is astonishing stuff. Putting the thing to a vote. Wow, what a concept. Reducing it to a simple set of words that ordinary people can read and decide whether they're for or against. Magna Carta is not even written in English, and no one votes on it at all. So we give the world popular sovereignty and abolition and other stuff too, and that's what you'll learn about in the books. And wow, it's imperfect because there is, there are all these exclusions, and you'll see them, and you'll learn how people, ordinary people, improved the system, made amends for the sins and the lapses of earlier generations. Now, final thing, I'm trying to write novelistically because I got to suck you, the ordinary reader, into the story. I used to be an informal advisor to this TV show. Some of you may have seen it. It was an earlier era called The West Wing, and it had an ensemble cast. And you're interested in, Josh Lyman and C.J. Craig and how they interact or something. So, and here I end. Volume 1, I've got 6 main characters. They're, by acclamation, the big 6, the most important founders, and you're going to tell me their names. They're second tier of folks, but they're the main characters, and their names are George Washington, Adams, Hamilton, Jefferson, Madison, and Franklin. Your first 4 presidents, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and your 2 geniuses, Hamilton and Franklin. I just proved that you're all Americans. We have a common culture, but we actually need to know, okay, what did they do? Sometimes they came together, sometimes they came apart. So, and then there are other people, Sam Adams, James, Patrick Henry, John Hancock. There are others, but survey says, big 6, the first 6 in Family Feud, those are the big 6, yes. And I tell you about them in volume 1. Here's the problem. They're all white men. Don't blame me. That's just the history of the thing. I'm going to tell you in this volume a story about women's equality, ending with women's suffrage, and black equality, 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments. So I'm going to need a different cast of characters. I've got 4 that basically carry me from 1840 to 1920. I think you're going to give me at least 3 of the 4. So who, would your 4 be? And if you've read the book, hold off. But, if you're trying to tell the story of the move from, half slave and half free to women's suffrage everywhere. Lincoln, he has to be preeminent. I'm on a first name basis with these guys, so he's Abe to me. And he'll be Abe to you because when you read the book, you will know him. And wow, he's epic. He's so much better than you ever even imagined. And I'm going to tell you about his flaws too. No country has ever produced and then picked as its leader, its supreme leader, anyone as impressive as Lincoln. No country. And that's American greatness. But you need to understand what's great about him, including an amendment that says people born in America under the flag are equal citizens, which is under attack now. Okay, so the irony is a movement that talks about American greatness doesn't understand the greatest American and his project. Okay, so I got Abe. Who else? Remember, it's about black equality and female equality, and I had too much of a white man cast. Frederick Douglass, America's most important black, preeminent. So I got Abe and I got Frederick. They meet 3 times, and every time is epic. And I tell you that the story of their meetings. Her boss, basically, she's a little bit of a Jane come lately. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who in my first sentence of my first chapter is Elizabeth Cady. She hasn't yet basically gotten married on a whim. By the end of that first paragraph, she's Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and she's refusing to say the word obey in her vows because it's supposed to be an equal relationship. So I got Elizabeth Cady, who becomes Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Those are the 3 that everyone gets. And Susan B. Anthony is going to be her helper. I've got Abe. I've got Frederick. Harriet Beecher Stowe. No one picks Harriet. Is that Sean who said that? Have you read the book? Okay. No one picks Harriet Beecher Stowe, but she's epic. She's America's first female superstar, first leading lady. Everyone's talking about her. So before there was Taylor, that is Swift. My in-laws have a whole album on the Swift Eras tour. I went through it last night. And before there was Beyonce or Hillary Rodham Clinton or Kamala Harris or Eleanor Roosevelt, there's this woman, and she writes a book, and it sells 3 million copies. And she's writing openly as a woman, as a mother, about women and mothers. Jane Austen doesn't write under her name. Neither do any of the Bronte sisters. They're Currier Bell, Ellis Bell, Acton Bell. They don't write under their names. George Eliot writes under a male pseudonym. George Sand, Louisa May Alcott writes under a pseudonym. Most of them aren't mothers. She's writing as a woman, as a mother, talking about how slavery is a system of rape, how it rips children away from women's breasts, how it's a horrible system. It's not just a labor system. And everyone is reading the book, and the world will never be the same. And and Abigail Adams is epic, but she's off stage, you see. But Harriet Beecher Stowe is America's first female superstar, and most of you actually haven't thought about her. But when you read the book, I'll introduce you to her. She's quite amazing. Okay, so that's what the book is about. I've told you a little bit about the birth equality idea. What else should we talk about? What do you want to know about? What do you want to converse about? Yeah, the first two questions are supposed to come from students in this tradition. They were at dinner, yes.
My question was, how would you compare the 19th to early 20th centuries struggles over suffrage and equality to the contemporary battles over voting rights, gerrymandering, and birthright citizenship?
I think we decided the question of birthright citizenship. Your generation could change the Constitution, but I think actually it was hard to put this in, and it should be hard to take it out. And if you're going to take it out, it's going to require an amendment, and that's birthright citizenship. I think Abraham Lincoln was, and this is a very controversial thought in the book, an originalist, meaning he was going to follow what the Constitution actually said, even when he didn't like it. It's there in front of your eyes when he says 77 years ago. He's making an argument about what happened 87 years earlier. No one in this audience can remember what happened 87 years before. You'd have to be 93 and have a good memory to remember what happened 87 years earlier. He will enforce the Constitution even when he doesn't like it. He doesn't like the Fugitive Slave Clause. He thinks slavery is evil. But originalists will enforce the law even if they don't like it, and he will. Today, I think the law is not evil. It's about birthright citizenship, and it should be enforced. And you could change it, you and your generation, if you want to. But I wouldn't want you to do it unless you understood first why they put it in the first place. Because a smart person learns from their own mistakes. A really smart person learns from other people's mistakes. Let's learn from the mistakes that earlier Americans made when they didn't commit themselves to this birth equality principle. So that's birth equality. On gerrymandering, truthfully, everyone's opposed to it and no one knows what it means. It has no definition at all. It could mean at least 7 things. The 2 parties rigging the system against a third party. Well, actually, ours is a 2-party system. The dominant party rigging the system in favor of itself. That would be California today, Texas. But listen, the gal who gets 60% of the votes for governor in California gets all of the governorship. So I don't know why it's actually improper if one party gets an overwhelming majority of votes to have all the seats. I'm not sure why, but in any event, That's different from incumbents rigging the system in favor of themselves, because some of the incumbents are Republicans. So is gerrymandering, the majority party rigging the system in its favor? Is it incumbents rigging the system in their favor? Is it taking political considerations into account? That's everyone. Is it a minority party rigging the system so it wins a majority of the votes? That would be a problem, but it's very hard to pull off, and it's not what's happening in California or Texas. Is it not having very many swing districts? Well, if people are geographically clustering, there may not be that many swing districts, because the Republicans, the conservatives, live with conservatives, and the liberals live with liberals. So what does it actually mean? Now, if you want more, I've got 2 chapters in America's Unwritten Constitution for you to read. I've got multiple podcast episodes for you to listen to. And speaking of listen to, if you don't want to read the book but want to experience it in audio form, the intro to the book is actually narrated by my dear friend, a great actor. The younger generation will know the name, John Mulaney. The disadvantage of the audio version is you won't get the endnotes with all the documentation. So you might want to actually get a couple of versions, the audio version, and borrow a library book so you can look at the endnotes. But gerrymandering, everyone's opposed to it, but no one can define it. So this is, and the press will make you stupid, okay? Because they'll just talk endlessly about gerrymandering. Next time, ask someone to tell you what gerrymandering is, because there are 6 different definitions and they pull in different directions. So you asked about birthright citizenship, you asked about gerrymandering. What, you asked about one more thing? 2 more things? Yes. Well, suffrage, we now have a Voting Rights Act, and in principle, lots more people vote, okay. Gerrymandering I talked about. Birthright citizenship, I said you could get rid of it, but at least know why we have it. Are those the main ones? And voting rights, yes. Gandhi was once asked what he thought of Western civilization, and he said, I think it would be a good idea. Now, the Constitution, before Abe Lincoln didn't protect voting rights because of slavery, because South Carolina wouldn't do it. You have a Constitution that uses the phrase rights to vote in 5 different amendments, 3 of which are talked about in this. The 14th Amendment, Section 2, the 15th Amendment, and the 19th Amendment all say the right to vote. So in my lifetime, to the 24th and 26th Amendments. So I'm what you call an originalist. Originalists are not conservatives only. They're people who take seriously the Constitution, its text, its history. And you now have a Constitution that says the words, word for word, the right to vote 5 times. And you need to understand how each one, no race discrimination in the right to vote, another, no sex discrimination in the right to vote, and there are other things. So I'm saying to you, in Gandhi fashion, on voting rights, I think it would be a good thing. Gandhi, of course, meant, people thought we already had Western civilization. I think we already have a right to vote. But if you don't know it, then we lose it. If your generation doesn't know, it says it 5 times, and why and what those mean. And we have podcast episodes on that. So thank you for that.
Hi again.
Hey, yeah.
I kind of want to touch upon what you were talking about near the end about introducing these main characters. You almost treat the Constitution and American history like you're telling a story in some ways through these songs. Right. I'm curious, in an era where, because of this stupid thing and because of other reasons as well, it seems like our history, it's hard to almost create some sort of homogeneity or consensus on what is true or not. Because of online discourse, you see it in state legislative acts telling certain schools that you can't teach about slavery and certain things in that way. And so I'm curious, what are some challenges in writing a book about history in this age where it seems like we can't even create a consensus on what is true and what isn't true? Is this book in some ways a reaction to that?
So the biggest challenge has not been that the book has been banned. I'm kind of hoping that the book will be banned because it might be good for sales. People might think, oh, maybe it's got some good sex scenes in it. It actually doesn't have good sex scenes in it. So the biggest challenge, honestly, is just widespread apathy. And this is such a free society. You're free to spend your time, paying attention to other stuff, to 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 football or fashion, or food or anything else. And this is freedom that you get to actually live a life and have commitments. Some of them can be hugely important. Your church, your community organizations. But the biggest challenge is people have to read these long books. Okay, but unless they do, they actually don't know what made them free. It says the right to vote 5 times. How we go from a world where no woman votes to a world where all women vote, because women can't vote themselves the vote, you see. So how does it ever happen? Well, you read these books and you'll find out actually how it happened. And part of it is not completely PC. Where did women get the vote first? Utah isn't one early place, but Wyoming, Idaho, Colorado, and Utah. Now, Wyoming, first of all, do you know why Wyoming is the first place to give women the vote? Because there are no women. There are 6 white men for every white woman in 1870 when Wyoming gives women the vote. And very bluntly, the men are desperate. They are so desperate that they will even vote for women's suffrage to try to induce women to come to Wyoming. Now, that's not a totally politically correct story, but I give you tons of evidence for this. But it also has a feminist side, because the only reason that they do it is because they think that women want this, because Elizabeth and Susan and others are actually, and Frederick too, do not forget, an amazing male who believes in women's suffrage, are pushing for this. Okay? So, and there are 15 other things that explain how women get the vote. And one interesting question is why even white women, wealthy white women, get the vote so much later than black men, even uneducated black men. Well, you'll know a lot more about all of that when you read the book. So, how does constitutional change happen? How did women who at a certain point didn't have the vote, how did that ever happen in the world? And once you understand how change happened and when and who made it happen, you'll be much better equipped to think about whether further change should happen in your lifetime and how you might go about making it happen.
Thank you. What an honor. I enjoy the podcast. I've been listening to it. I had just taken the bar exam in July 2022. So I finally had something to do. And I finally had time to find something to do. And I just looked for a podcast dealing with the Constitution, and I stumbled onto America's Constitution. And it's been life-changing in many ways. First of all, I love how Andy calls you Akhil.
Yes.
Vic, who I guess Karen, his wife, is here, calls you
Yes.
Akhil.
Uh-huh.
So I always notice the distinct pronunciations that you get.
Yeah, my parents pronounced it a little differently than my best friend. Oh, I see Bob Cowden there. Oh, hey, how you doing? Okay, he's wearing his Las Lomas hat. Okay.
But I've learned so many things, and I just to point out a few great ideas. I had often heard about originalism, but never really understood exactly what it was. It was almost always used in the context of Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
That was the low-hanging fruit of originalism. You come to find out through you, it's much more complicated.
Originalism is basically the thought that we should pay attention to what the Constitution originally meant to the people who adopted it. What were they trying to do? And what the various amendments originally meant to the people who adopted the amendments. So the 14th Amendment, I would say, was about birthright, citizenship, birthright equality. And that's originalism. And that means that Donald Trump's executive order is unconstitutional because he's going against the core purpose, meaning, original meaning of that amendment.
And there's so many wonderful ideas. I wish I could sit here and tell everybody how many great
Well,
things
thank
there
you.
were. The things you said on the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, which were so different than what I learned in law school.
Yeah,
Um,
I have a lot of kooky ideas, and you get to decide for yourselves.
The thing you talked about with the library, picking up your card. I've heard your Hugo Black stories, and that invokes Hugo Black.
So of my four main characters, Abe Lincoln is born in the dirt. No fame, no family, no fortune. He has less than a year's schooling. We're not talking about college and law school. Less than a year's classroom education his whole life. But in effect, he has a library card. He can read. And that's Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass is born a slave, but he teaches himself to read. In the 20th century, I think the greatest justice was a hick from the sticks. He didn't go to a fancy law school, but he could read. And he was Franklin Roosevelt's first appointment to the court. And he's not who you were taught. You were taught that the Warren Court was led by Earl Warren, who was a very great California governor, but not a thinker. You were taught, if you went to law school, the great leader of the Warren Court was William Brennan, who was a very good man. He went to Harvard, and so Harvard thinks he's great. And you were taught that they did all sorts of good things by disregarding the Constitution and just making it live and evolve. And I say no. The greatest justice of the 20th century was on the court way before Brennan and way before Warren, and he didn't go to a fancy law school, but he had a library card. And he read and he read and he read, and he was a liberal, and his name was Hugo Black. He's Franklin Roosevelt's first appointee to the court. And here's the world when Hugo Black gets on the court, 1930, and this will be volume 3. I haven't written volume 3 yet, but he's going to be, very important in volume 3. So there was no judicially protected right to vote, not one person, one vote. He says, it says right to vote 5 times. And judges didn't protect freedom of political expression. He says, it says free speech. And the Bill of Rights didn't apply against the state and local government, only against the federal government. He says, the 14th Amendment is all about rights against misbehaving states and localities. And there was organized sectarian prayer in the public schools, recitational prayer. And he says there's supposed to be religious equality and freedom. And there was huge racial inequality and segregation. He says it says equal. And criminal defendants had precious few rights enforceable in court. And he says it says right of counsel, and you're not giving people their right of counsel. So again and again and again, Hugo Black is saying, look at the Constitution actually is protecting stuff that we judges aren't. That's originalism. And the Warren Court, in my view, overturned all sorts of precedents in the name of the Constitution, but that was on the liberal side. Originalism isn't inherently conservative. It isn't inherently liberal. It's taking seriously the Constitution as opposed to the cases. And here's what Lincoln said. Lincoln said, Dred Scott is saying all sorts of things. It's saying Congress can't prohibit slavery in the territories. They just made that up. The Constitution says Congress can regulate the territories. And one of the first statutes ever adopted prohibited slavery in the Northwest Territories. They just made it up. So Lincoln is running against the Supreme Court. But the thing is, and in the way that Trump runs against the Supreme Court, the difference is Lincoln was a lawyer who actually read the Constitution and was right about this. And the citizenry knew it because they read the Constitution too. Lincoln doesn't win unless ordinary citizens actually look at the thing and say, he's right. They did just make that up. That's originalism. But he needs the citizens to do it. The Constitution isn't magic. It only works when the citizens actually take it seriously, which is why you have to read the books. You just do. Otherwise, we die.
So I can't hold this thing forever. As much as I'd love to sit here and talk with you, I'm sure there's others who want to ask, but I just want to say a couple more things. So the first is, and this is a perfect place to say this because we're at St. Mary's, institution founded by a religious group. I think your book, you call it a trilogy, and I love your use of words throughout the books. You love puns. You like doing fun things with them, but I think your book is more of a trinity.
Thank you.
Let it be the holy trinity, constitutional law and history. So that's how I think of it. And then finally, something I thought would be good to talk about. I'm excited to hear some things about the third book, and I can't wait. If you release it in 2 years, you can refer to 5 score and 7 years ago.
Oh, cool.
So,
Thank you.
but my question is, you have talked many times about the idea that that sequence of amendments that you address in this book add up to the ERA.
Yes.
And
The 14th Amendment, which doesn't say race, it says everyone's born equal, black or white, male or female. Elizabeth Cady Stanton actually writes the words that kind of are actually precursors to the 14th Amendment. It's about female equality every bit as much as it's about race equality, but not for voting. 14th Amendment was about what they called civil rights, but not voting rights. That's why you needed a 15th Amendment for blacks when it comes to voting, and you're going to need a 19th Amendment when it comes to women, when it comes to voting. But once you have equal civil rights for women, the 14th Amendment, and equal voting rights for women, the 19th Amendment, I think 14A plus 19A in effect equals ERA. Now, I want to say it again once more with feeling. I'm for it, but I don't think it actually changes that much. I think we already in effect have a strong equal rights tradition in our amendments. There's one question back there. I know we have to end pretty soon. Yeah, well, this guy looks young, so I have to, we had to bring in the young people. And I'm sorry I went on too long. I should have transitioned to questions a little bit earlier. My apologies.
Hello, is this thing on? Okay, there we go. Hello, Mr. Amar. My name is Arthur.
Hey, Arthur.
I'd like to start by extending my gratitude to you for coming to speak with us today. We
No,
the same
my gratitude to you. Seriously, this is like one of the best days of my life.
Well, we really appreciate it, and we welcome you here with open arms. I have 2 questions for you tonight, sir, and they are, throughout the course of your political and academic or scholarly careers, what were A, your most triumphant victory or accomplishment, and B, your most devastating setback that you feel comfortable sharing?
Yeah, a lot of those have been personal things. Truthfully, I don't think I've been as great a person as I should have been. And being honest with you, I've made lots of mistakes in my life. Here's what I try to talk about in the books. How some people, because you can't change what happened in the past. You can just ask for forgiveness and go forward. And I know where we are, that we're in St. Mary's. And I heard the point about, the Trinity, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, God in 3 persons, so I understand where I am. And I'm saying I come out of a faith tradition in which you can't, you can only ask for forgiveness for the mistakes you've made and try to go forward and do better. Now that you asked me a very honest question, I'm giving you the most honest answer. Again, I'm not going to go into the details here. Here's what I'm going to tell you. These books tell the story of some people who actually get better as time goes on. George Washington gets better on slavery. Benjamin Franklin gets better. And some people get worse, and it's very sad to see. Thomas Jefferson, who begins with such ideals and ends up corrupting them because he actually founds a political party and he goes with the party. And I understand why he goes with the party. And there are people today who are going with their party, and there are other people who actually break with the party because actually they think the party is doing bad things. So Jefferson and Madison actually have downward trajectories. Franklin and Washington have upward trajectories. And at the end of The Words That Made Us, the last chapter, I narrate the death scenes of all of the big 6 and try to show you who got better and who got worse. And since I'm telling you stories about real people, that seems interesting to me. Who gets better and who gets worse over time? So my biggest failures, I think I've had a very successful career, but I made lots of other mistakes, and I'm trying to make amends for them as best I can. So those on successes, I think if I'm lucky enough to complete volume 3, see, what I'm actually trying to do is pay back the country that the day I was born made me a citizen. Even though I'm a little brown-skinned baby and in a white country, and my parents aren't citizens. I'm trying to pay back America for the gift that it gave me, pay back the Constitution for the gift it gave me. So my greatest triumph, truthfully, will be, I'm hoping, if I can finish volume 3, I will have written, I think, what's really almost the only constitutional, complete constitutional saga that's not really skewed. There are people who've written books about American history, but I think some of them are very skewed by their own politics. I told you already that I'm not a fan of Howard Zinn's projects. I think all his mistakes are on one political side. I've made tons of mistakes, but they're symmetric. My epitaph will be his errors were symmetric. Okay, and so I'm hoping, but I can only do that. You ask me an honest question, I'm getting an honest answer if people read the books. See, because otherwise, then they fall stillborn. And what I'm trying to do, this is what I'm trying to do. This is how we end. If you woke up tomorrow and you looked in the mirror and you didn't recognize the face because you had amnesia, you'd be lost. You know, your limbs would still work. You know, intact, you have your health, but you wouldn't know who your spouse is, who your kids are, you know, who your siblings are. You would have lost your life. Okay, you'd have amnesia. Now I'm saying if we Americans don't understand our history, which is the only thing that we have in common, because we don't have actually the Catholic Church or even the Christian religion or anything, so we don't know who we are. We're lost. My ridiculously ambitious project, it's preposterous. I know it is, but I'm supposed to do something with the life force that God gave me, is to try to write 3 volumes that will tell the complete story of America from the beginning to the present moment that's not infused with my own politics. And that people in America, liberal and conservative, you know, of different faith traditions, can read and say, I now understand what it means to be an American, and now I can decide whether I'm for amending the Constitution to get rid of birthright citizenship or not. And now I can actually, I'm in better position to know when the Supreme Court makes things up that aren't really faithful to the Constitution, and when they're actually being faithful to the document. That's what I'm trying. And if I succeed, and I haven't yet, I think that would be, you know, that would be a wonderful life. Thank you
so much. Appreciate it.